Rain hammers against the tin roof of Joe Miller's auto repair shop in downtown Houston, drowning out the sound of his wrench on metal. It's nearly midnight when he hears it. Soft crying outside his back door. There, huddled beneath the dim security light, stands a woman with a bruised face and a small boy clutching her hand. Their clothes are expensive but soaked through. Without hesitation, Joe ushers them inside, offering his office couch and a warm blanket. He notices things. The boy's perfect posture, the woman's refined speech, a gold pendant bearing an unfamiliar crest. But Joe doesn't ask questions. Some stories need time to be told. What secret could be so dangerous that it would drive an educated woman and her son to seek refuge in a stranger's garage? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Joe Miller's day always started at 5 a.m., when Houston was still draped in darkness and possibility. This morning was no different, except for the two sleeping figures on his office couch. He moved quietly, starting the ancient coffee maker his father had bought when he first opened the shop 30 years ago. The familiar aroma of motor oil and coffee grounds filled the air, scents that had defined his life since he was tall enough to hold a wrench. The woman and boy had fallen asleep quickly last night, exhaustion evident in their faces. Joe had covered them with the blanket he kept for long winter nights at work, then retreated to his small apartment above the shop, though sleep had eluded him. Something about their arrival tugged at memories of his own mother, who taught him that kindness wasn't a choice, it was a responsibility. He studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Weathered face, salt and pepper hair cropped close, hands permanently stained with the honest work of decades. At 48, he wore his years like his father's old leather work jacket, comfortable, earned, lived in. The shop below was his inheritance, not just the concrete and tools, but the principles that came with them. Fix what's broken. Help those in need, ask for nothing in return. The toolbox sitting on his workbench had been his father's wedding gift to him, back when he thought he'd have a family of his own by now. Sarah had other plans, leaving him for a real estate developer, who promised her the kind of life Joe never could. That was 15 years ago, and he'd since made peace with his solitary existence, finding purpose in the steady rhythm of engines and the grateful smiles of customers who couldn't afford dealership prices. His sister Maria called him a soft touch. "You'll work yourself into the poorhouse," she'd say, knowing full well he often accepted payment plans or bartered services when cash was tight. But Joe understood something his business-minded sister didn't. Sometimes the richest moments in life came disguised as acts of charity. The morning light was beginning to seep through the high windows, casting long shadows across the cement floor. Joe checked his appointment book. Mrs. Henderson's Buick needed new brake pads, and old Mr. Chen's delivery van was due for its monthly maintenance. Regular customers, good people who trusted him with their vehicles and their stories. He heard stirring from his office, and the soft murmur of voices. The boy appeared first, small and solemn in rumpled clothes, holding his mother's hand. In the clear light of morning, the woman's bruises looked worse, purple shadows beneath eyes that held both fear and determination. Joe noticed how she positioned herself between her son and the door, protective, instinctive. "I'm Joe Miller," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "There's coffee brewing, and I can run across to Mama Rosa's for breakfast tacos if you're hungry." He didn't mention the bruises or ask why they were here. Some questions were better left unasked. The woman hesitated, then spoke with the kind of precise diction that suggested private schools and debutante balls. "I'm Elena, and this is Timothy. We can't thank you enough for your kindness last night. We won't impose on you any longer." But Joe saw how Timothy's small hand tightened on his mother's, saw the flash of panic in Elena's eyes as she glanced toward the door. Whatever waited for them out there was worse than trusting a stranger. "My apartment upstairs has a spare room," he heard himself saying. "It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to it, for as long as you need." The spare room hadn't seen guests in years, not since Joe's father passed. Elena and Timothy settled in quietly, like shadows trying not to disturb the dust. The boy carried himself with an unnatural stillness for his age. Joe guessed around. 7, as if he'd learned early that drawing attention was dangerous. 3 days passed in a careful dance of politeness and unspoken questions. Elena kept the apartment spotless, making beds with hospital corners and organizing the mismatched dishes in the kitchen cupboards. She'd flinched when Joe first reached for his coffee mug near her, a reflexive movement that made his jaw clench. Timothy watched everything with serious brown eyes, particularly Joe's hands, as he worked on engines below. "You like cars, buddy?" Joe asked one afternoon, noticing the boy hovering near his workbench. Timothy nodded, one hand unconsciously touching the gold pendant that matched his mother's, both bearing what Joe now recognized as some sort of family crest, though he couldn't place it. "Father has 17 of them," Timothy said softly, then pressed his lips together as if he'd revealed too much. Elena, who'd been reading a worn paperback nearby, looked up sharply. "Timothy," she said, her voice gentle but firm. The boy retreated to her side. But Joe had caught that glimpse into their past. 17 cars meant serious money, the kind that bought silence and influence. Joe focused on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, giving them space. He'd noticed other things too. Elena's perfect French when she'd helped an elderly customer last Tuesday, the way she'd corrected Timothy's table manners at dinner. "Elbows off the table, darling," her instinctive reach for a napkin to place in her lap. "Old money manners," his mother would have called them. The local news played quietly from the small TV in the corner of the shop. Elena stiffened at certain stories, especially anything mentioning the city's wealthy families. She wore long sleeves, despite the Houston heat, and Joe pretended not to notice how carefully she applied makeup each morning to cover the fading bruises. Timothy was slowly warming to him, watching intently as Joe explained basic engine parts. The boy's vocabulary was impressive. He'd called a carburetor fascinating yesterday, sounding like a miniature professor. But there were moments when his age showed through, like when he'd spotted the ancient Super Nintendo console in Joe's closet. "Mother, look, just like the one in the pool house," Timothy had exclaimed before catching himself again. Elena's face had tightened, but she'd nodded permission for him to play. Now the familiar music of Mario Kart filled the evening hours, bringing a hint of normalcy to their unusual arrangement. Joe's sister Maria stopped by daily, ostensibly to check on him, but really to assess their mysterious guests. As a paralegal at Houston's largest family law firm, she had a nose for stories that didn't add up. "They're running from something, Joey," she'd whispered yesterday. "Or someone. Rich people don't hide in mechanic shops." He knew she was right. But watching Elena help Timothy with his reading, she'd produced a battered copy of The Hobbit from their small backpack. Joe couldn't bring himself to care about their secrets. He recognized the look in Elena's eyes when she thought no one was watching. The haunted gaze of someone who'd learned that wealth and status were poor substitutes for safety. The gold pendant caught the light as Elena leaned forward to sound out a word with Timothy. Joe had seen something similar recently, though he couldn't place where. The crest showed an oil derrick rising from waves, with a Latin phrase he couldn't read curving beneath it. Elena always tucked it away quickly when she noticed anyone looking, her fingers trembling slightly. That evening, as Houston's heat finally began to fade, Joe found Timothy sitting on the fire escape outside the apartment window. The boy's small legs dangled through the rails, his posture still impeccably straight. "You know," Joe said, settling carefully beside him, "my dad used to sit out here with me when I was about your age. Said you could see all of Houston's stories from up here." Timothy considered this with the grave thoughtfulness that seemed to define him. "Do all stories have happy endings, Mr. Miller?" The question hung in the humid air between them, heavy with the weight of whatever had brought them to his door. That rainy night, Joe thought carefully before answering. "Not all of them, buddy, but the best stories are the ones where people help each other along the way. Sometimes that's better than a happy ending. Timothy nodded, his small hand moving to touch. The pendant again. Mother says you're a good man. She doesn't trust good men anymore, but she trusts you. Joe let the words settle, understanding both the complexity of the compliment and the responsibility it carried. Below them, Houston's evening traffic hummed, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. Timothy didn't flinch at the sound anymore, progress of a sort that made Joe's heart ache. The Houston Chronicle lay folded on Joe's workbench, its headline partially visible. Search continues for missing Blackwood heiress. He hadn't paid much attention to the society pages before, but lately Maria had taken to leaving newspapers. Around the shop, her paralegal instincts working overtime, Joe pushed it aside, focusing instead on the steady stream of customers that kept Miller's auto repair afloat. Elena had proven surprisingly helpful around the shop, her delicate hands surprisingly capable with a computer. She'd organized his decades-old filing system and modernized his appointments calendar, though she carefully avoided answering the phone. When customers asked, Joe simply introduced her as family staying for a while. In Houston's summer heat, nobody questioned too deeply. Your lady friend's got quite an education, Mr. Chen commented one morning after Elena had helped him understand his van's maintenance schedule in perfect Mandarin. Reminds me of my granddaughter at Rice University. Joe just nodded, though. He'd noted how Elena had disappeared quickly after the exchange, as if regretting the slip that revealed her knowledge. These moments happened more frequently now. A casual reference to European cities she'd visited, a detailed explanation of corporate tax law while helping Maria with a crossword puzzle, the way she'd correctly diagnosed Mrs. Henderson's arthritis just by observing her grip on her car keys. She's a doctor, Timothy had whispered to Joe one evening, pride overwhelming his usual caution. The best kind that helps sick babies. Elena had gone pale at her son's words, but didn't contradict him. Maria visited more frequently now, bringing groceries and concerned glances. Joey, she'd said last night, after Elena and Timothy had gone upstairs, I've been doing some digging. She'd tried to show him another newspaper article, but Joe had waved it away. They'll tell us when they're ready, Maria. And what if ready comes with trouble? His sister's dark eyes, so like their mother's, held genuine worry. I've seen enough domestic cases to know when something's bigger than it seems. As if to prove her point, the shop's phone had started receiving hang-up calls. Elena's face turned ashen at each ring, and Timothy had taken to hiding behind the office desk when unknown numbers appeared on the caller ID. Joe's old dog, Rex, a grey-muzzled German shepherd who usually slept through the day, had appointed himself Timothy's personal guardian. The dog followed the boy everywhere, growling softly at sudden noises or unfamiliar customers. Timothy had blossomed under Rex's protection, gradually showing flashes of the child he must have been before fear became his constant companion. Father never let me have a dog, Timothy confided while brushing Rex's coat, another task he approached with characteristic precision. He said they were beneath our station. The boy pronounced beneath our station with careful dignity, clearly quoting someone else's words. Joe watched them from his workbench, noting how Timothy's small shoulders relaxed when he thought no one was looking. Elena, too, had begun to shed layers of tension, though she still started at sudden movements and checked the locks 3 times each night. The community had embraced them in its quiet way. Mama Rosa from the taco shop sent extra portions for the skinny boy and his pretty mama. Mrs. Henderson brought children's books she'd saved from her teaching days. Even gruff old Mr. Chen left bags of fresh vegetables from his son's market, but there were other changes too. Black SUVs cruising slowly past the shop, men in expensive suits walking by, phones raised as if taking photos. Elena had stopped joining. Joe on the fire escape after sunset, and Timothy's nightmares had returned. One morning, Joe found Elena staring at a newspaper Maria had left. Her fingers traced the grainy photo of a man in an expensive suit standing before a corporate logo that matched the crest on her pendant. Her hands shook as she quickly folded the paper away. "I could help," Joe said quietly, making sure to keep his distance. "Whatever it is." Elena's smile held more sadness than joy. "You already are, Joe? More than you know." She touched her pendant, unconsciously, then added, "But there are some storms you can't fix with a wrench and good intentions." The weight of unspoken words hung between them, heavy as Houston's summer air. Outside, a black SUV rolled past again, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like dark mirrors. Joe watched Elena's reflection in his office window, saw how she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, looked every inch the woman Timothy had proudly called a doctor. But her hands, those elegant hands that spoke of a life far removed from auto repair shops, still trembled as she clutched her hidden pendant. Joe turned back to the engine he was repairing, but his mind was on the growing stack of newspapers in Maria's office, each headline hinting at a story that was slowly finding its way to his door. Whatever storm Elena spoke of, he had a feeling the first raindrops were already falling. The burner phone fell from Elena's purse as she reached for her coffee, clattering across Joe's kitchen table. 3 identical phones lay scattered among crumpled receipts and spare batteries, the kind of phones people bought when they didn't want to be found. Joe pretended not to notice how quickly she gathered them up, her hands shaking. That morning had started with unusual tension. The black SUV had parked across the street for over an hour, its engine idling in the dawn heat. Elena had spotted it first, her face draining of color as she peered through the apartment blinds. Timothy wouldn't leave her side, his small body pressed against her leg like a shadow. "Just customers getting an early start," Joe had said, but even he didn't believe it anymore. The men inside the SUV wore suits despite the Houston humidity, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses as they watched the shop's entrance. Elena's panic attack came without warning. One moment she was helping Joe with paperwork, the next she was gasping for air, her elegant fingers clutching the edge of the desk. "They've found us," she whispered over and over. "Oh God, they've found us." Joe moved slowly, carefully, the way his father had taught him to approach wounded animals. "Elena," he kept his voice steady, "you're safe here. Timothy's safe." He didn't touch her. He'd learned that lesson in the first week, but stayed close enough to block anyone's view through the office window. Timothy appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of adult concern that no child should wear. "Mother?" His voice carried the weight of experience, of having seen this before. He moved to her side with practiced ease, taking her hand and counting breaths with her. 1, 2, 3, like Dr. Sanders taught us, remember? Joe's chest tightened at their rehearsed routine. He'd seen enough by now to piece together fragments of their story, the wealth, the abuse hidden behind social status, the carefully planned escape. But watching them now, a mother and son counting breaths together in his cramped office, he realized how little he truly understood about their world. The SUV's engine gunned suddenly, and Elena flinched so hard she knocked over her coffee cup. As Joe cleaned up the spill, he noticed her switching out one of her burner phones for another, her movements precise despite her trembling hands. The phone she retired disappeared into a plastic bag, destined for disposal somewhere far from the shop. "I should have known they'd check private mechanics," she murmured, more to herself than to Joe. "It's how they found us in Austin." She caught herself, pressing her lips together, but the damage was done. Another piece of their past slipped into place. Joe thought of the newspaper clippings Maria kept bringing him, the ones he'd refused to read. Maybe it was time to know what they were really dealing with. But before he could speak, Timothy's sharp intake of breath drew their attention to the window. A man in an expensive suit was walking directly toward the shop's entrance, his face familiar from the newspaper photo Elena had seen days ago. She grabbed Timothy, pulling him behind her as she backed toward the office's rear door. The boy didn't make a sound, a silence born of practice that broke Joe's heart. "The storage room," Joe said quietly, already moving to intercept their visitor. "Lock the door." He didn't need to say more. Elena and Timothy vanished like smoke, leaving only the lingering scent of her coffee in the air. The man entered with the confidence of someone used to doors opening at his approach. His suit probably cost more than Joe's monthly earnings. His shoes, handmade Italian leather that had never seen honest work. But it was his smile that set Joe's teeth on edge, the kind of smile that never reached cold eyes. "Joseph Miller?" The man's voice carried the polished accent of private schools and boardrooms. "I believe you may be harboring some property of interest to my family." Property. The word hung in the air like a threat. Joe thought of Timothy's careful posture, of Elena's flinching at sudden movements, of the bruises that had finally faded from her face. His father had taught him to fix things, to help people in need. But sometimes, Joe knew, helping meant standing between broken people and the ones who'd broken them. "Just me and my dog here," Joe replied, matching the man's smile with one of his own. "But you're welcome to leave your card if you need any automotive work done." The man's smile tightened fraction. Behind him, through the shop window, Joe could see the SUV's driver speaking into a phone. In the storage room, hidden behind boxes of spare parts and years of accumulated tools, a mother and her son held their breath, counting together in silence. After the man in the expensive suit left, Joe found Elena and Timothy exactly where he'd left them, huddled in the storage room's darkest corner. Timothy's sketchbook lay open on his lap, filled with crayon drawings that made Joe's throat tight. Dark figures in suits, a woman crying, a large house with bars on the windows. But the newest drawing showed something different. 3 figures standing before what was clearly Joe's shop, with a big grey dog beside them. "A family. Robert will never stop looking," Elena said that evening, after Timothy had finally fallen asleep upstairs. Her voice was raw, as if each word had to be dragged from some deep, wounded place. "He's not used to losing things he considers his." They sat in the dim light of Joe's office, the Houston night pressing against the windows. The burner phones lay on the desk between them, like evidence of a life spent running. "I was 23 when we married," Elena continued, her fingers twisting the gold pendant. "Fresh out of medical school, ready to change the world. The Blackwood name opened every door, and Robert—" She paused, collecting herself. "Robert was charming, right up until the day after the wedding." Joe waited, giving her space to find the words. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance, and Elena flinched at the sound. The first time, he said it was my fault. I'd embarrassed him at a board meeting, questioned one of his decisions in front of his father. The second time, I'd spent too much money on children's vaccines for my clinic. By the third time, he didn't bother with excuses anymore. Maria's warnings echoed in Joe's head. His sister had seen too many cases like this, wealth and power becoming weapons, money buying silence and complicity. "Timothy," Elena's voice broke. On her son's name, he started seeing things no child should see. Robert said it would make him a man. 3 months ago, when Robert threw me down the stairs because I refused to close my pediatric clinic, Timothy tried to stop him. My 7-year-old son tried to fight a grown man to protect me. Joe's hands clenched involuntarily. He thought of his own father, who'd taught him that a man's strength was measured by his gentleness, his worth by how he treated those who needed protection. "We ran that night," Elena said. "I had some cash saved, emergency papers hidden, but Robert, he has connections everywhere. Police, private investigators, even some judges. In Austin, they found us through hospital records. I'd started working at a clinic under a false name. In San Antonio, it was a school Timothy had enrolled in. Each time, we barely got away." She pulled something from her pocket, a crumpled newspaper clipping about a prominent Houston oil family, the same one Maria had tried to show him. "The Blackwood Oil Company owns half of Houston's refineries. Robert's father is dying, and soon my husband will control everything. Unless what?" Joe asked. though he suspected he knew the answer, unless I claim my inheritance first. Edward Blackwood was my father too, from his first marriage. The shares were meant to be split between Robert and me, but after the wedding, she shook her head. Robert had me sign papers. I was young, in love, stupid. Now he wants to make sure I never contest them. Timothy's voice drifted down from upstairs. Another nightmare. Elena moved to stand, but Joe gestured for her to stay. I'll go, Rex is with him. When he returned, Elena had composed herself, though her eyes were red. We should leave, she said quietly. You've been too kind already, and when Robert realizes we're here... No, Joe's voice was firm. Running hasn't worked so far. Maybe. It's time to stand and fight. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand enough. Joe thought of Timothy's drawings, of Elena's fading bruises, of the practiced way they hid from sudden noises. My father used to say that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad. Family is one of them. Elena looked up, sharply. We're not your family, Joe. Maybe not by blood, he agreed, thinking of the drawing in Timothy's sketchbook. But family isn't always about blood, is it? A car drove past the shop, its headlights sweeping across the office windows. Elena tensed, but Joe noticed she didn't run this time. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, looking more like the doctor she'd once been than the fugitive she'd become. If we stay, she said slowly, you need to understand what you're risking. Your shop, your reputation. My father built this place on two things, fixing cars and helping people who needed it. I reckon taking on some rich bully and his oil money fits both categories. For the first time since she'd arrived that rainy night, Elena smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and erased years of fear from her face. Timothy was right about you, she said softly. Oh, you're a good man, Joe Miller. Maybe the first. One I've known since my father died. Above them, Timothy's voice called out again, but this time it wasn't from fear. Mr. Joe, can you tell me another story about when you were a mechanic in the army? They shared a look, acknowledging what wasn't being said. Sometimes the biggest decisions in life weren't really decisions at all, but simply recognition of what was already true. Go on, Elena said, her voice stronger now. Your audience awaits. As Joe climbed the stairs to where Timothy waited, he heard Elena making a call on one of her burner phones. Maria, she said quietly, I think it's time we talked about those legal papers you've been researching. The old photograph slipped from Elena's medical textbook as she reached for it on Joe's highest shelf. It showed a younger Elena in a cap and gown, standing beside a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and the same pendant she now wore. Edward Blackwood's arm was wrapped proudly around his daughter's shoulders as they stood before Houston General Hospital. The image was creased from frequent folding, clearly carried through each hurried escape. That was my white coat ceremony, Elena explained, carefully smoothing the photo's worn edges. Father flew in from Dubai just to be there. Robert was furious, said it was unseemly for a Blackwood to work as a common doctor. 2 weeks had passed since Elena's confession, and life at Miller's Auto Repair had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Elena's medical knowledge proved surprisingly useful in the shop, her steady hands and eye for detail helping Joe with the more intricate repairs. She'd even started handling customer intake, her natural empathy drawing out the subtle symptoms of automotive ailments that customers struggled to describe. Like diagnosing a patient, she'd explained, showing Timothy how to listen to a troublesome engine. The car tells you what's wrong, if you know how to listen. The boy absorbed everything. His previous perfect posture now relaxed as he sat, cross-legged on a clean shop towel, carefully organizing Joe's socket wrenches by size. Joe watched them from beneath Mrs. Davidson's Camry, noting how Eleanor's shoulders had begun to drop their defensive hunch. She moved more freely now, laughing at Mama Rosa's jokes when the old woman brought their lunch, offering medical advice to customers who mentioned aches and pains. You've got a good thing going here, Mr. Chen observed one morning after Elena had expertly diagnosed both his van's transmission problem and his arthritis, like a real family business. The word family no longer made Elena flinch, though Joe noticed she still touched her pendant when nervous, a habit that reminded him of his mother clutching her rosary. The golden oil derrick caught the light as she bent over an engine, and Joe thought about how symbols of wealth and power could become anchors of either pain or hope, depending on who held them. Timothy had started school again, enrolled under a careful alias with Maria's help. His teacher called to praise his exceptional manners and intelligence, though she mentioned he seemed startled by loud noises and preferred to sit with his back to the wall. Elena had cried that night, but they were different tears than before. "He's just a little boy again," she whispered to Joe over late-night coffee. "This morning, he asked if he could join the science club. Before, he wasn't allowed to join anything that might interfere with Robert's social calendar, but danger still lurked at their periphery. Black SUVs continued their slow patrols, and Elena had caught one of Robert's private investigators photographing Timothy through the school fence. The boy had handled it with disturbing composure, calmly reporting the incident to his teacher and waiting in the office until Joe arrived. "You did good, buddy," Joe had said afterward, watching Timothy methodically. "Clean spark plugs as a way to calm himself. Real good. Father always said Blackwoods don't run to authority figures," Timothy replied, his voice small but steady. "But you and Mother said asking for help isn't weakness, it's being smart." Joe's heart swelled at being included in "you" and Mother, at being part of the team that was helping this brave kid rewrite his father's toxic lessons. He thought of his own father's words about family being more than blood, about how sometimes life's greatest gifts came disguised as its greatest challenges. Elena found them later. Timothy asleep on the office couch with Rex standing guard. Joe nearby working on paperwork. She held up a small notebook, Timothy's latest drawings, showing the three of them at a school science fair, Joe and Elena proudly watching Timothy explain his project. The dark figures in suits were still there in the background, but they were smaller now, less threatening. "He's healing," Elena said softly, her doctor's training evident in her assessment. "We both are." She paused, looking at Joe with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I never thought we'd find safety in a place like this with someone like—" She trailed off, but Joe understood. Life had taught Elena that men with power were dangerous, that help always came with strings attached. Yet here she was, finding refuge in a humble auto shop with a mechanic whose only power lay in his integrity and gentle hands. "Your father would be proud," Joe said, nodding toward the photograph she still carried. "Of both of you." Elena touched her pendant, but this time the gesture seemed more like a connection to strength than a nervous habit. "He would have liked you, Joe." He believed character mattered more than credentials. Outside, Houston's evening traffic hummed its familiar song, punctuated by the distant rumble of thunder. Another storm was coming, but this time they weren't facing it alone. The threatening letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the shop's door before dawn. Joe found it while opening up, the expensive cream-colored stationery incongruous among the oil-stained concrete. "Consider carefully who you're protecting," it read in elegant script. "Some machines aren't worth fixing." He'd meant to hide it from Elena, but she'd developed an uncanny sense for trouble. She appeared at his elbow as he read it, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd started buying from Mrs. Henderson's daughter's shop. Her hand brushed his arm as she took the letter, and neither of them acknowledged the lingering touch. "Robert always did love his metaphors," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling paper in her hands. "In his world, everything and everyone is a possession to be maintained or discarded." The morning light caught her face, highlighting cheekbones that had filled out during her weeks at the shop. The bruises had long faded, replaced by a healthy glow that came from regular meals and nights of actual sleep. She'd taken to wearing her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of the tight defensive bun of her early days. "I have something to show you," she said suddenly, leading Joe to the office computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. pulling up financial records that made his head spin. Maria's been helping me understand Father's original succession plan. The shares weren't just split between Robert and me. They were structured to prevent exactly what Robert did after our marriage. Joe leaned closer, aware of how naturally they'd learned to share space. Meaning the papers I signed, they shouldn't have been legal. Father had safeguards in place. Trustees who were supposed to protect my interests, but they all mysteriously stepped aside after Robert's father took control. A loud engine rumble interrupted them. Another black SUV crawling past the shop. But this time, Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened, looking more like the accomplished doctor in her father's photo than the frightened woman who'd appeared at Joe's door. "They're getting bolder," Joe observed, thinking of Timothy alone at school. As if reading his mind, Elena shook her head. "Maria's paralegal friend is watching the school, and Principal Chen, Mr. Chen's daughter, she knows to call us if anyone unusual comes around." The US hung in the air between them, comfortable and dangerous all at once. They'd become a unit without discussing it, sharing responsibilities for Timothy, trading off cooking duties, falling into domestic rhythms that felt increasingly natural. The shop door chimed, and both tensed until they recognized Mama Rosa's cheerful greeting. But instead of her usual delivery, she rushed in with worry creasing her face. "Jose," she said, using Joe's full name as she only did in serious moments, "there are men in suits at my shop, asking questions about your Elena." "And the boy?" "Your Elena." Joe felt Elena's small intake of breath beside him, knew she'd caught the possessive phrase too. Before he could respond, two of the men appeared in his doorway, blocking the morning light. "Mrs. Blackwood," the taller one said, his tone professionally menacing. "Your husband is concerned about your extended absence." Joe stepped forward, but Elena's hand on his arm stopped him. She moved with deliberate grace, every inch the Blackwood heiress, rather than the frightened fugitive. "My husband's concern would be more convincing if he hadn't put me in the hospital 3 months ago," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from generations of boardroom power. "Now, unless you have a court order, you're trespassing on private property." The men hesitated, clearly unprepared for this version of their quarry. The shorter one reached into his jacket, but Joe was faster, his body shifting subtly into the boxing stance he'd learned in his army days. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. The man's hand stilled. Mama Rosa had vanished, but the sudden arrival of police sirens suggested where she'd gone. The men retreated, but not before the taller one smiled coldly. "Happy birthday to the boy," he said. "Shame if he had to spend it without his mother." The threat landed like a physical blow. Elena swayed slightly, and Joe's arm went around her. Waist without thought, she leaned into him just for a moment before straightening again. "Timothy's birthday," she whispered. "It's next week. I didn't think Robert would remember." "Hey." Joe turned her gently to face him, his calloused hands. "Careful on her shoulders. Nothing's going to happen to either of you, I promise." She looked up at him, their faces close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Why are you doing all this, Joe? Really?" The question deserved a careful answer, but before he could find the words, she'd risen on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, gentle, carrying the weight of gratitude and fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Elena." He kept his voice soft, giving her space to retreat if she needed. "Don't apologize, not for this." Outside, the police were questioning Mama Rosa, who was giving an animated description of suspicious characters, complete with creative gestures. The morning sun streamed through the shop windows, catching Elena's pendant and making it glow like a promise. They had a birthday party to plan, and threats to handle, and 1,000 reasons to be cautious. But standing in his office, with Eleanor's hand still resting over his heart, Joe realized some risks were worth taking. Maria burst into the shop waving a stack of legal documents, her paralegal efficiency temporarily overwhelmed by sisterly concern. "Elena Catherine Blackwood," she announced, slapping a marriage certificate onto Joe's workbench. "Graduated top of her class from Baylor Medical, specialized in pediatric trauma. Married Robert James Blackwood in 2018. And look at this." She produced another document, this one bearing multiple official seals. 3 separate attempts to file restraining orders, all mysteriously dismissed. Elena stood very still by the office door, her hand instinctively reaching for Timothy at the sound of his father's name. But the boy was safe at school, participating in his first science club meeting, protected by a network of watchful teachers and Mr. Chen's grandson, who'd appointed himself Timothy's unofficial bodyguard. "Maria," Joe started, but his sister was in full legal mode now. "There's more. Edward Blackwood's original will, filed in 2015, specifically protected Eleanor's inheritance with a triple-blind trust structure. But after his death in 2019, everything changed. The trustees resigned one by one, all within months of each other. And look at this." She spread out bank statements showing suspicious transfers. Each trustee received exactly $1 million through offshore accounts. Elena's voice was quiet but steady. "Father always said Robert's greatest talent was buying people's souls at wholesale prices." The documents covered Joe's workbench like evidence at a crime scene, each paper telling part of a story of wealth, betrayal, and calculated cruelty. Marriage license, medical license, hospital privileges at Houston's top facilities, all suspended or revoked through Robert's influence. "Why didn't you tell us everything?" Maria demanded, but her tone held more worry than accusation. "I could have helped sooner. The firm I work for is on retainer with Blackwood Oil," Elena finished. "Most of Houston's legal firms are. Robert made sure of that after I tried to leave the first time." Joe watched Elena move toward the workbench, her fingers trailing over her lost credentials. She looked both younger and older than her 32 years, a woman who'd achieved so much only to have it stripped away by the man who'd promised to love her. "I was afraid," Elena admitted, meeting Maria's eyes. "Not just of Robert, but of involving others. The last person who tried to help me, my former nurse Jennifer, lost her license and had to leave the state. Robert doesn't just destroy his targets, he salts the earth around them." Maria's expression softened. She'd seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the patterns of isolation and control. But now we have evidence. These financial records, the pattern of legal obstruction. "We also have a problem," Joe interrupted, holding up his phone. A news alert showed Robert Blackwood standing at a podium, his corporate smile perfect as cameras flashed. The headline read, "Blackwood Oil Heir announces expansion, addresses family matters." Elena went pale as Joe turned up the volume. "While I'm grateful for the public's concern regarding my wife's temporary absence, I want to assure everyone that Elena is receiving the best care for her unfortunate conditions. We look forward to her return home, where she belongs." The implication was clear. Any attempt to fight back would be painted as the delusions of an unstable woman. Elena's hands clenched into fists, her wedding ring long since discarded. "He's laying groundwork," Maria said, her legal mind racing. "If Elena surfaces to challenge him, he'll claim she's mentally unfit. The timing of this press conference isn't coincidental. Timothy's birthday is next week. He's letting Elena know he can still control the narrative." Joe moved to Elena's side, close enough to support but not touching, letting her choose the distance. Her voice, when it came, held a new steel. "He never understood what Father tried to teach us about power. Robert thinks it's about control, about breaking things and people to prove you own them. But real power—" She touched her pendant, the oil derrick catching the light. "Real power is about building things, protecting people, making lives better." She turned to Maria, her decision visible in the set of her shoulders. "You're right. It's time to stop running. But we do this carefully, strategically. Robert expects me to be either the crying victim or the crazy wife. He won't expect this. She gestured around the shop, at the life she'd built here. He won't expect me to fight back with the truth. Maria pulled out her laptop, already typing. I have contacts at the Houston Chronicle, journalists who've been trying to crack the Blackwood oil story for years. And I know a judge, recently appointed, who doesn't owe Robert any favors. We'll need to move quickly, Elena said, her doctor's precision returning as she outlined their strategy. Once we start, Robert will use everything he has. The restraining orders weren't dismissed because they lacked evidence. I had photographs, hospital records, witness statements. They were dismissed because Robert buried them in legal motions until the witnesses changed their stories or disappeared. Joe watched the two women bend over Maria's laptop, sister and almost more than friend, united in purpose. He thought about Timothy's birthday next week, about the party they'd planned with his school friends, the first real celebration the boy would have without his father's controlling presence. Elena, he said, softly drawing her attention. Whatever. You decide, whatever path you choose. You're not alone anymore, either of you. She met his eyes, and in that moment he saw both the frightened woman who'd appeared at his door and the strong physician who'd fought her way through medical school. The kiss they'd shared earlier hung between them, unspoken, but not unacknowledged. I know, she said simply. Then with a ghost of a smile, a good mechanic knows which tools to use for each job. Maybe it's time we used everything we have to fix this broken machine once and for all. Outside, Houston's afternoon traffic moved in its endless flow, unaware that in a humble auto repair shop, 3 people were plotting to challenge one of the city's most powerful men. But this time, Elena wasn't just running from something. She was fighting for something. For Timothy's future, for her father's legacy, and for the unexpected family she'd found in a place she'd only meant to hide. The business card appeared innocent enough, sitting on Joe's workbench one morning. Heavy cream-colored stock, embossed with the Blackwood Oil logo and the name James Harrison Blackwood, Executive Vice President. But it was the handwritten note on the back that made Elena's hands shake. Family matters should stay in the family, dear sister-in-law. He was here, Elena whispered, looking around the shop as if James might materialize from behind a tool cabinet. Robert's brother never does his own dirty work. This is serious. Joe had arrived early to find his shop's padlock cut, though nothing was stolen. Instead, someone had gone through his files, leaving subtle signs, papers slightly askew, folders not quite closed, a warning showing how easily they could be reached. They're escalating, Maria said, examining the card. She'd started working from the shop's office, her laptop surrounded by legal papers. James Blackwood showing up personally right after Robert's press conference. They're worried. Elena's fingers traced the embossed logo, the same oil derrick, design as her pendant. James was always the smart one. Robert inherited their father's cruelty, but James, she shuddered. James inherited his patience, his ability to play the long game. The morning's customers brought more signs of corporate pressure. Mr. Chen arrived in distress, explaining that his delivery van's commercial insurance had been suddenly cancelled. Mrs. Henderson tearfully reported that her son's college scholarship, funded by a Blackwood Oil subsidiary, was under review. They're targeting anyone who helps us, Elena said, watching Joe comfort Mrs. Henderson. His gentleness with the elderly woman made her heart ache. This is what Robert does. Isolates, intimidates, controls. But something unexpected happened. Instead of pulling away, their little community pulled closer. Mama Rosa arrived with lunch for everyone, declaring loudly that she'd never taken dirty oil money and wasn't about to start now. Mr. Chen's son showed up with 3 other independent mechanics, offering to help Joe with his growing backlog of repairs. We take care of our own, Mama Rosa said firmly, setting down enough enchiladas to feed an army. Those fancy suits think money is power. Ha! They should see my grandmother's chancellor. That's real power." Elena watched the shop fill with neighbors and friends, each bringing what they could. Mrs. Henderson's daughter, the soap maker, set up a small display near the office, directing customers there instead of her usual downtown spot. Mr. Chen's grandson reported that his entire high school auto shop class wanted to apprentice with Mr. Miller, who stands up to bullies. Joe moved through it all with steady grace, accepting help without pride, giving guidance without condescension. He showed younger mechanics the tricks his father had taught him, paired experienced hands with newcomers, turned his shop into something that felt like home. The thought hit Elena with unexpected force. Here, among the engine parts and tool chests, she'd found what all of Robert's mansion couldn't provide: safety, community, purpose. She watched Joe demonstrate a timing belt replacement. To two eager teenagers, his hands sure and gentle on the machinery. Those same hands had held her during her panic attacks, had high-fived Timothy's academic achievements, had built a fortress of normalcy around their broken pieces. Earth 2. "Elena," Maria waved, breaking her reverie. "The journalists here. Sarah Chen, Mr. Chen's eldest daughter, and the Houston Chronicle's rising investigative reporter, sat in Joe's office, her press credentials catching the light. "Let's talk about the pattern of corporate intimidation," she said, recorder ready, "and about how a respected pediatric trauma surgeon ended up hiding in an auto repair shop." Elena squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of her father's pendant. "No," she said firmly. "Let's talk about how an auto repair shop became the one place in Houston strong enough to stand up to Blackwood Oil." Sarah's eyes lit up at the unexpected. Engel, as Elena shared their story, carefully with Maria's legal guidance, she felt something shifting inside her. Each small act of resistance, each person choosing to stand with them, was a crack in Robert's carefully constructed power structure. Joe appeared in the doorway during her description of the community's response, and their eyes met. The connection between them had grown stronger since that first kiss, though they'd been too busy with survival to explore it fully. But it was there in every shared look, every casual touch, every moment of unspoken understanding. A commotion outside drew their attention. Timothy burst into the office, excitement overwhelming his usual caution. "Mother, Mr. Joe, look what we made in Science Club." He held up a project board covered in meticulous diagrams of engine parts, each labeled in his careful handwriting. "The physics of auto repair," Elena read, her throat tight. In the corner, Timothy had drawn their now familiar family portrait. Himself, Elena, Joe, and Rex, all standing proudly before the shop. Sarah watched the interaction with journalists' eyes, but her smile was genuine. "Now that," she said, "is a story worth telling." Later, after the shop had quieted and Timothy was upstairs doing homework, Elena found Joe in the garage, staring at James Blackwood's business card. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for bringing all this chaos into your life." Joe turned, and his expression made her heart skip. "Elena," he said, taking her hand, "some chaos is worth every minute." She stepped closer, drawn by the warmth in his voice. The shop's radio played softly in the background, some old country song about finding love in unexpected places. Outside, Houston's evening traffic hummed its urban lullaby, while inside, two people who'd never planned on finding each other swayed slightly to the music, surrounded by tools and trust and possibility. The business card lay forgotten on the workbench, its threat diminished by something stronger than corporate power. The simple, unshakable truth that love, like a well-built engine, runs best when every part works together. The USB drive was smaller than Elena's thumbnail, but it might as well have been a bomb for the way she handled it. "Jennifer, my former nurse, she hid this in Timothy's teddy bear before Robert drove her out of Houston. I never knew what was on it until now." Maria's laptop displayed spreadsheet after spreadsheet, each one damning in its detail. Environmental reports doctored to hide oil spills, safety violations covered up with carefully routed bribes. medical records from company clinics showing patterns of worker injuries systematically misclassified to avoid investigation. Your father was investigating this, Maria said, scrolling through archived emails, before his sudden decline. Decline? Joe caught the hesitation in Elena's voice. Elena, what aren't you telling us? She twisted her pendant, a gesture he now recognized as her gathering courage. Father's death was convenient. He'd started asking questions about the company's safety protocols, especially after a refinery fire killed 3 workers. The official report blamed operator error, but Father found evidence of deliberate negligence. Maria finished, holding up a memo. Cost-cutting measures approved by Robert and James against your father's explicit orders. The shop felt suddenly too small, the weight of corporate crimes pressing in like Houston's summer heat. Joe watched Elena pace, seeing both the frightened woman from that rainy night and the determined doctor who'd fought her way through medical school. There's more, Elena said. The pediatric clinic I ran, it served many of the refinery workers' families. I started noticing patterns, children with unusual respiratory issues, clusters of rare cancers near certain facilities. When I tried to launch a formal study, Robert shut you down, Joe guessed, remembering her earlier words about the clinic. Elena nodded. He said I was becoming hysterical, that I was imagining connections that didn't exist. That's when the physical abuse escalated. He couldn't risk me talking to outside researchers. A series of sharp raps on the shop's door made them all jump. But it was only Mr. Chen, his face grave. Health inspectors, he reported. At every small business that supports you, Mama Rosa's kitchen, my son's market, even Mrs. Henderson's daughter's soap shop, they say they received anonymous complaints. Joe's hands clenched. He'd expected retaliation, but this systematic attack on their entire support network felt personal. They're trying to squeeze us out. No, Elena said suddenly, her doctor's analytical mind clicking pieces into place. They're trying to force us into making a mistake. All these pressure points, the insurance cancellations, the scholarships, the inspections, they're waiting for us to react rashly, to give them something they can use against us. Maria was already typing. The timing matters. These inspections started right after Sarah Chen interviewed you. They're worried about the story. A knock at the door revealed Sarah herself, looking windblown and excited. They tried to kill the story, she announced without preamble. My editor received a call from the paper's biggest advertiser. Guess who? Blackwood Oil, they all said together. But here's the thing, Sarah continued, pulling out her phone. The attempted suppression, that's part of the story now. And I'm not the only one interested. I've got colleagues at 3 national papers wanting to collaborate. Elena sank into Joe's office chair, the weight of possibility and danger warring on her face. If we do this, if we go public with everything, Robert won't hold back. He'll use every weapon he has, including Timothy, Joe said quietly, naming her greatest fear. He'll claim I'm an unfit mother. He has judges in his pocket. Character. Witnesses ready to testify about my mental instability. He'll say I'm paranoid, that I invented the abuse, that I'm poisoning Timothy against him. Joe knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. Elena, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. You're not alone anymore. Every person Roberts tried to intimidate, they're ready to stand with you. Mr. Chen's family, Mama Rosa's customers, Mrs. Henderson's church group, they've all seen who you really are. A woman who helps their children with homework, Maria added, who treats their injuries and listens to their problems. A mother who puts her son's science project on the shop wall, Sarah chimed in. Who shows up to every school event, who's teaching him that strength isn't about power over others. Elena looked around the shop, her refuge turned battleground, turned home. Her father's pendant caught the light, and for the first time she saw it not as a symbol of what she'd lost, but of what she was fighting to rebuild. Timothy has his science fair next week, she said slowly. Robert's never attended a single school event, but he'll try to use my absence against me. He knows I won't risk going, not with his men watching the school, unless—" Maria's eyes lit up with legal strategy. "That's exactly what we do, but on our terms, with witnesses and security and Sarah's photographer documenting everything." "A mother supporting her son's education," Sarah nodded, "against a father who's never shown interest. It's a powerful image." Joe squeezed Elena's hands gently. "Your choice, Doc. We follow your lead." Elena looked down at their intertwined fingers. Her manicured hands, still bearing traces of her previous life, clasped in his work-roughened ones. The contrast felt right, like precision instruments working in harmony with raw strength. "Father always said courage isn't about not being afraid," she said finally. "It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway." She straightened in. Her chair, every inch the Blackwood heiress, but tempered now with hard-won wisdom. "Let's show Robert what real power looks like." The new security system chimed as Robert Blackwood pushed through the shop's door, bringing Houston's winter chill with him. He moved like he owned the space, like he owned everything, his Italian shoes incongruous against the oil-stained concrete. Two bodyguards flanked him, while James lingered by the door, playing the role of concerned brother-in-law to perfection. "Really, Elena?" Robert's voice dripped corporate condescension. "An auto repair shop? I suppose there's a certain quaint charm to your little rebellion." But Elena wasn't the same woman who'd fled his mansion 3 months ago. She stood behind Joe's counter wearing shop coveralls, her father's pendant displayed prominently, grease smudges on her fingers from the transmission she'd been helping rebuild. "This isn't a rebellion, Robert. It's a resurrection." Joe moved to stand beside her, close enough for support, but giving her space to fight her own battle. He'd learned that Elena's strength grew when she wasn't overshadowed, when she had room to stand tall on her own terms. "Your performance as a working-class hero is touching," Robert said, examining a nearby wrench with exaggerated distaste. "But it's time to end this farce. The board meeting is next week. Father's condition is deteriorating. The family needs to present a united front. United in covering up industrial accidents." Elena's voice could have cut steel. "In hiding toxic spills, or just in silencing anyone who questions where the bodies are buried." Robert's corporate mask slipped for a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. "Careful, dear wife. Remember what happened the last time you made accusations without proof." "You mean when you pushed me down the stairs?" Elena's voice carried to the front of the shop where Mama Rosa had appeared with her lunch. "Delivery." The old woman's face hardened as she set down her bags, pulling out her phone to record. "Or when you paid off the emergency room staff to change the records." "Elena." Robert's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "Think of Timothy. How traumatic it would be if his mentally unstable mother lost custody. If he had to testify about your paranoid delusions. Don't you dare threaten my son." The doctor's precision in Elena's voice could have dissected atoms. "The same son whose science fair project you've never seen, whose nightmares you dismissed, whose future you were willing to sacrifice for corporate profits." James stepped forward, ever the sophisticated mediator. "Elena, be reasonable. The company's reputation." "The company's reputation?" Joe's quiet voice cut through the tension. "Let's talk about reputation. Mr. Chen's grandson is in the hospital with breathing problems. His house backs up to your refinery. He's not the only kid in that neighborhood getting sick." "Unfortunate coincidences," James said smoothly, "though our legal team would be happy to discuss a confidential settlement. Like the settlements you offered the widows of those refinery workers." Elena pulled out her father's USB drive. "Father kept records, Robert, of everything. The falsified safety reports, the buried environmental studies, the medical records you tried to erase." Robert's mask cracked further. "You're lying. We cleared Edward's files." "Cleared?" Elena's laugh held no humor. "Thank you for confirming. That brother-in-law, Sarah, did you get that?" Sarah Chen stepped out of Joe's office, digital recorder in hand, press credentials gleaming. Behind her, Maria smiled like a shark scenting blood. Got it all, including the implicit admission of destroying evidence. Robert moved with frightening speed, but Joe was faster. His army boxing training hadn't faded, and Robert's swing met. Only air as Joe sidestepped, positioning himself between Elena and her husband. "Still fighting other men's battles, Elena?" Robert sneered, straightening his jacket. "First your father's crusade for corporate responsibility, now playing house with a mechanic?" "No, Robert." Elena's voice rang with authority. "I'm fighting my own battles now, and I'm not alone." As if on cue, cars began pulling up outside. Mr. Chen's extended family, Mrs. Henderson's church group, Mama Rosa's entire restaurant staff, the high school auto shop class. Even Principal Chen arrived, carrying a folder of Timothy's school records showing his improved grades and emotional growth. "You see that?" Joe said quietly, watching Robert register the growing crowd. "That's real power. Not buying people's silence, but earning their trust. Not breaking things, but fixing them. How touching." Robert's corporate mask reasserted itself. "James, call our friends at the health department. I believe this establishment is due for an inspection." "Already done," Maria announced. "Full compliance verified by 3 independent inspectors. Would you like to see the reports? They're quite detailed about attempted bribery by certain corporate interests." Robert's face contorted. "You think these people can stand against Blackwood Oil? We own half of Houston." "No, Robert." Elena touched her pendant, her father's legacy. "You borrowed half of Houston, and loans come due." The security system chimed again as Timothy entered with Mr. Chen's grandson. The boy froze at the sight of his father, but didn't run. Instead, he walked to Elena's side, then deliberately took Joe's hand. "My science project won first place, Father," Timothy said, his voice small but steady. "It's about how engines work, how broken things can be fixed if you understand them and care enough to try." Robert stared at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time, and something like uncertainty crossed his face. This wasn't the timid child he'd left. This boy stood straight-backed between a mother who'd found her strength and a man who'd shown him what real fatherhood looked like. "This isn't over," Robert said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "No," Elena agreed. "It's just beginning. The board meets next week, father's shares vote, and unlike you, Robert, I actually read the company bylaws, all of them." The implications hung in the air like Houston's summer humidity. Robert turned to leave, his corporate armor notably dented. But at the door, he faced Elena one last time. "You'll regret this," he said, but his threat sounded hollow against the backdrop of community solidarity. Elena looked at the life she'd built from the wreckage Robert had created, at Joe's steady presence, at Timothy's growing confidence, at the shop that had become more than a hiding place. "The only thing I regret," she said clearly, "is not doing this sooner." Edward Blackwood's will arrived by courier the next morning, delivered by his former secretary, who'd kept a sealed copy hidden for just this moment. The elderly woman's hands shook as she passed the thick envelope to Elena. "Your father knew," she said softly. "He knew they'd try to bury the original." The document's implications unfolded like a corporate tsunami. Elena wasn't just Edward's daughter from his first marriage, she was his chosen successor. The shares Robert had forced her to sign away weren't just valuable, they were controlling. Edward had structured the company so that his daughter's medical ethics would guide its future, not Robert's ruthless profit-seeking. "He left you 51%, Maria whispered, scanning the legal language. "The shares Robert acquired through your marriage? They were never his to take? Your father put them in an unbreakable trust that only activated upon—" "Oh my God." Elena's hands tightened on the paper. "Upon proof of domestic abuse," she finished. "Father suspected. He built a failsafe into the company itself." Joe watched the weight of this revelation settle over Elena. She wasn't just fighting for freedom anymore, she was fighting for her father's vision of what Blackwood Oil could be. But they had barely processed this twist when Timothy's school called. Robert had arrived demanding to see his son. The school's security protocols had stopped him, but his lawyers were already filing emergency custody motions. "He knows," Elena said, her doctor's calm warring with maternal panic. "Someone leaked the will's contents. He's making his move before. We can act on it." They raced to the school, Elena clutching both the will and Timothy's favorite stuffed dinosaur, the one he still slept with despite claiming he was too old for toys. But Robert had already left, leaving behind a wake of legal threats and corporate intimidation. They found Timothy in Principal Chen's office, pale but composed. "I didn't talk to him," the boy said proudly. "I remembered what Joe taught me about standing my ground." Elena pulled her son close, breathing in his familiar scent of pencil shavings and workshop dust. But their reunion was interrupted by the arrival of James Blackwood, looking more rattled than his usual polished self. "Elena, we need to talk." His corporate mask slipped, showing genuine fear. He's not well." When he saw the will's contents, he started making calls. "Dangerous calls? What kind of calls?" Joe stepped closer to Elena and Timothy, protective but not hovering, the kind that make problems disappear permanently. James ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Look, I know we're enemies, but this is beyond corporate games. Robert's talking to people who don't care about legal documents or board votes." As if to underscore his warning, Elena's phone buzzed with an alert from Maria. Robert had emptied the corporate security fund, millions of dollars now untraceable. "He's hiring someone," Elena realized, her arms tightening around Timothy, "like he did with Jennifer, my nurse. But this time he's not trying to scare you away." James finished. "He wants you gone before the board meeting, both of you." He looked at Timothy, and for the first time, genuine remorse crossed his features. "I've done terrible things for this company, Elena. But I can't be part of this." The school's hallways felt suddenly exposed, every window a potential threat. Joe made a quick call to Mr. Chen, activating their community phone tree. Within minutes, a protective convoy was arranged. Mama Rosa's delivery vans, Mr. Chen's market trucks, and a dozen other vehicles ready to confuse any watchers. But as they hustled Timothy toward Joe's truck, shots rang out. James shoved Elena aside as a bullet shattered the window behind her. Joe pulled Timothy down, covering him with his body, as more shots followed. The attack was brief but effective, a professional warning. When they emerged from cover, they found James clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his expensive suit. "Consider my debt paid," he gasped. "Father would have hated what we've become, what Robert's become." Emergency vehicles approached as their community brigade formed a protective circle. Sarah Chen was already there, photographing everything, ensuring this escalation wouldn't be buried in corporate silence. "The board meeting," Elena said suddenly, helping paramedics with James's wound. Her medical training took over, her hands steady, despite the chaos. "Robert's not just trying to stop me from attending. He's creating a scenario where I'll look unstable if I do attend." "A shooting at your son's school?" Maria appeared, already documenting the scene. "He'll spin it as your paranoid delusions. Putting Timothy in danger. Classic abuser tactics, but on a corporate scale." But Timothy, still held close in Joe's protective embrace, spoke up with unexpected clarity. "Then we show them who's really dangerous. Like in my science project, everything leaves traces, even bad things trying to look good." Elena looked at her son, seeing Edward's analytical mind behind his young eyes. "The money transfers," she said slowly. "Robert's not as careful when he's angry. If we can trace the security fund withdrawals, I can help with that." James's voice was weak but determined. "I know his patterns, his contacts. Let me do this one good thing." As the ambulance prepared to transport James, Elena faced a choice. The woman who'd arrived at Joe's shop that rainy night might have run, taken Timothy, and disappeared into another hidden life. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She touched her father's pendant, then reached for Joe's hand. "We're done running," she declared. "Robert wants to play corporate chess? Fine, but he forgot the most important rule of chess." "What's that?" Joe asked, his thumb brushing her knuckles in silent support. Elena smiled, and for the first time, it held all the power of her birthright without any of its burden. Sometimes the piece you thought was just a pawn turns out to be a queen in waiting. And queens? She looked at Timothy, at Joe, at their gathered community of protectors. Queens protect their family at all costs. The private investigator's file sprawled across Joe's workbench. 5 years of corporate malfeasance, documented with methodical precision. James had been thorough in his redemption, providing records even Elena hadn't known existed. From his hospital bed, he'd given them everything. Offshore account numbers, shell company structures, and most damning of all, Robert's private server passwords. "He never thought I'd betray him," James had said, his wounded shoulder heavily bandaged. "Robert believes family loyalty means enabling his worst impulses. He forgot that sometimes loyalty means stopping someone you love from destroying themselves." Elena sat in Joe's office, surrounded by Maria's legal team. The shooting at Timothy's school had backfired spectacularly on Robert. Sarah Chen's photos of James taking a bullet meant for Elena had gone viral, and the corporate titans carefully maintained. Image was cracking. "The money trail is clear," Maria announced, highlighting transactions on her laptop. Robert's withdrawals align perfectly with previous accidents at the refineries. Every whistleblower who disappeared, every inspection that mysteriously changed. Its findings, we can trace the payoffs. Joe watched Elena absorb this information, marveling at her transformation. She wore her father's pendant now like a battle standard, her doctor's precision merged with newfound corporate authority. The woman who'd hidden from cameras now faced them confidently, telling her story with clear-eyed purpose. "What about Timothy?" he asked quietly. The boy was upstairs with Rex, working on a new project, a model of the shop he'd insisted on building for evidence of our real home. Elena's face softened at the mention of their son. Joe had started thinking of Timothy that way without realizing. His heart adopting the boy as surely as his home had adopted them both. "The custody hearing is tomorrow," she said. "Robert's lawyers are pushing the unstable mother narrative, but we have Principal Chen, Timothy's teachers, even his therapist ready to testify about his improvement since we left. And the shooting?" Joe's jaw tightened at the memory of covering Timothy with his own body of Elena's face when she'd heard the shots. "Ballistics came back." Maria held up a report. "The shooter used a very specific type of ammunition, the same kind Robert's private security firm specializes in. James provided the purchase records." Outside, Houston's winter sun cast long shadows. Through the shop windows, their community guard remained vigilant. Mr. Chen's family taking shifts watching the street. Mama Rosa's delivery drivers reporting any suspicious vehicles. Off-duty police officers from Mrs. Henderson's church volunteering. "Protection. Tomorrow's newspaper will be interesting," Sarah Chen said, entering with fresh coffee for everyone. "My editor approved a 3-part series. The Blackwood Oil Dynasty, Power, Abuse, and Redemption. The first piece focuses on Edward Blackwood's original vision for corporate responsibility, contrasted with what the company became under Robert's influence." Elena touched her father's pendant. "Daddy believed a company this powerful had obligations beyond profit. His first wife, my mother, died of cancer linked to industrial pollution. That's why he encouraged my medical career, why he structured the shares to protect my independence. And why Robert worked so hard to discredit you," Maria added. "A doctor with controlling interest in the company, one who'd seen firsthand the human cost of corporate negligence. You were a threat before you even realized it." Joe moved to Elena's side, close enough for support, but careful not to overshadow her moment. She'd grown into her power naturally, like a flower turning toward the sun after too long in darkness. "The Board meets in 3 days, she said, reviewing their timeline. Robert will try something else before then. He can't afford to let me present this evidence. Let him try. Joe's quiet confidence filled the room. He's used to fighting alone, Elena. You've got an army. As if to prove his point, Timothy appeared in the doorway, his model of the shop carefully held before him. He'd added tiny figures. Elena in her doctor's coat, Joe with his tools, Rex standing guard, and their entire supporting cast of community protectors. Look, he said, pointing to a miniature detail easily missed. I put in security cameras, like the ones Mr. Chen's grandson installed, and reinforced windows, and multiple exits. He'd thought of everything, their brave boy who'd learned too. Young to plan for danger, Elena knelt beside her son, examining his work. It's perfect, sweetheart. But you know what makes it really special? Timothy's serious face lifted to hers. What? It's not just a building. It's all these people choosing to stand together. That's what your grandfather believed in, that real strength comes from protecting each other. Joe watched them, this unlikely family forged in crisis and tempered by love. Elena caught his eye over Timothy's head, and the look they shared held everything they hadn't yet had time to say. Commotion outside drew their attention. Robert's latest legal threat had arrived. A thick envelope of motions and demands, but Elena didn't flinch as she had before. Instead, she handed the papers to Maria with a calm that spoke of absolute certainty. My father planned for this, she said, steel beneath her gentle tone. He knew what Robert was, maybe better than I did. The trust, the share structure, the fail-safes. He built a path for me to follow when I was ready. And now? Joe asked, though he already knew the answer. Elena stood every inch the heir to both her father's business acumen and his moral compass. Now we show Robert that real power isn't about what you can take from people. It's about what you can build together. Timothy added a final touch to his model, a tiny replica of Edward Blackwood's pendant hanging in the shop's window. Can we put the real one there? He asked. So everyone can see what we're fighting for? Elena unclasped the pendant, letting it catch the light. In 3 days, she would face Robert across the boardroom table, armed with truth and backed by a community's love. But for now, she simply helped Timothy place the pendant in his model, marking this humble shop as what it had become, a fortress built of trust, a haven created from hope, and a home founded on love. Perfect, she whispered, and this time she wasn't just talking about the model. The board meeting agenda sat on Joe's kitchen table, its corporate letterhead stark against the worn wood. Tomorrow, at 9 a.m., in Blackwood Oil's gleaming downtown headquarters, Elena would reclaim her father's legacy. The simple list of items belied the drama beneath: succession planning, review of environmental compliance, voting of shares. Your name isn't even on it, Timothy observed, studying the paper as he finished his breakfast. Father always said that's how you know something's important, when they try to pretend it's not happening. Elena paused in adjusting her suit jacket, her first time wearing corporate armor since fleeing Robert's mansion. The outfit had arrived that morning, courtesy of Edward Blackwood's former secretary, a tailored charcoal ensemble he'd ordered. For Elena's birthday, hidden away with the will. Smart observation, buddy, Joe said, dropping a gentle hand on Timothy's shoulder. Sometimes the biggest things hide in plain sight. Like love, Elena thought, watching them together. Like family, forming in the spaces between broken pieces. Maria arrived with final preparations, her paralegal efficiency in overdrive. James is being discharged this morning. He'll meet us directly at the boardroom. His doctor cleared him to testify about the shooting. And the custody hearing? Elena tried to keep her voice steady, but Joe heard the tremor beneath. Judge Chen was very interested in the timing of Robert's petition, Maria smiled, especially after reviewing the ballistics report from the school shooting. She's suspended all custody proceedings pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The shop below hummed with activity. Their community had gathered for final preparations, turning Joe's workspace into a war room. Mr. Chen's grandson monitored security feeds he'd installed throughout the neighborhood. Mama Rosa's delivery drivers reported on Robert's movements. His car had been at his club all night, multiple drinks ordered. "He's scared," Sarah Chen said, reviewing her notes for tomorrow's article. "My sources say he's been calling in favors all week. But James's evidence has everyone running scared. No one wants to be caught in the blast radius." Elena touched her father's pendant, now hanging boldly outside her suit jacket. Robert never understood what real power is. He thought fear and money were the same thing as respect and loyalty. Speaking of loyalty, Joe's sister appeared with a stack of notarized statements. "Every employee from your old pediatric clinic signed affidavits about Robert's interference with medical care, and 3 former refinery workers' families came forward about falsified death certificates." Elena reviewed the documents, her doctor's heart aching at the familiar names. Robert thought closing my clinic would silence these voices. He never understood that healing creates bonds that fear can't break. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Elena practiced her presentation with Maria, memorizing figures and dates. Timothy insisted on quizzing her, his small face serious as he checked her answers against their evidence. As evening fell, their supporters gradually departed, each leaving something behind. Mama Rosa's victory tamales in the fridge, Mrs. Henderson's hand-knit stress ball, Mr. Chen's traditional good luck charm, small tokens of faith in tomorrow's battle. Finally, it was just the 3 of them. Timothy had fallen asleep on the office couch, Rex standing guard. Elena stood at the shop window, watching Houston's lights flicker on, her reflection overlaid with the city she was fighting to protect. "Second thoughts?" Joe asked softly, joining her. "About facing Robert?" "No." She turned to him, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she never could with anyone else. "About what comes after? Maybe. Running a corporation this size. Being in the public eye. Hey." Joe's hand found hers, work-roughened fingers intertwining with her elegant ones. "You're not that scared woman from the rain anymore. You're Dr. Elena Blackwood, who diagnoses engines as easily as illnesses, who rebuilt her life from scratch, who taught a little boy that strength means standing up for what's right." Elena looked at their joined hands, at the distance she'd traveled from that desperate night. "I couldn't have done it without you, any of it." "Sure you could have," Joe smiled. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." The moment stretched between them, full of everything they hadn't had time to explore. Tomorrow would bring corporate battles and media storms, but tonight, Elena rose on her tiptoes, as she had during their first kiss. But this time there was no hesitation, no fear of consequences. Joe's arms wrapped around her with the same gentle strength he used with fragile engine parts, holding her like something precious but not breakable. When they parted, Timothy's voice drifted sleepily from the couch. "Does this mean we can be a real family now, after we beat Father?" Elena met Joe's eyes, seeing her own hope reflected there. "We already are, sweetheart. Tomorrow just makes it official." Outside, a security car drove past, Mr. Chen's cousins taking their shift. Inside, a family held each other on the eve of battle, their strength built not from corporate power or legal documents, but from the simple, unshakable truth that love, once given shelter, grows strong enough to weather any storm. "Get some sleep," Joe said finally. "Tomorrow, we show Robert what real power looks like." Elena touched her pendant one last time, feeling her father's presence in its weight. "No," she corrected gently. "Tomorrow, we show him what real family looks like." The recording device in Elena's suit pocket captured every sound in Blackwood Oil's mahogany-paneled boardroom. The subtle shift of expensive chairs, the clink of water glasses, the sharp intake of breath as she walked in. Not through the side. Doctor reserved for visitors, but through the chairman's entrance her father had once used. Robert's face tightened at her choice of doors, at her father's pendant gleaming against her suit, at the confidence in her stride. But it was the people behind her, that made him pale, Joe in a carefully pressed suit that somehow didn't diminish his quiet strength, James with his arm in a sling, and Maria carrying files bearing federal court seals. "This is a closed board." "Meeting," Robert snapped, but Elena merely smiled. "Check the bylaws, Robert. Article 7, Section 3. Any shareholder controlling more than 40% of voting shares may bring relevant witnesses to succession discussions." She laid her father's will on the polished table. "I believe 51% qualifies." The board members stirred, their practiced corporate expressions slipping. These were Houston's elite, oil barons, venture capitalists, old money names, who'd backed Robert's leadership without questioning the cost. But now they watched Elena with new eyes, seeing Edward Blackwood's authority in her bearing. "These supposed shares were signed over legally," Robert's lawyer began, but James stepped forward. "Were they?" His cultured voice carried to every corner. "Like the safety inspections I signed off on, the medical records we altered, the witnesses we paid to disappear." He placed a USB drive next to Elena's will. "I kept records, brother, of everything." Robert's mask cracked further. "You ungrateful The only ingratitude," Elena cut in, her doctor's precision filling each word, "is how you repaid our father's trust. A company built on innovation and integrity turned into a machine for crushing anyone who questioned your authority." She nodded to Maria, who distributed packets to each board member. "Your first quarter numbers are artificially inflated by 13%, achieved by systematically underreporting environmental compliance costs. The cancer clusters near your refineries, those families are ready to testify. The workers' deaths, you classified as operator error, their autopsy reports have been unsealed." The boardroom's air felt suddenly thin. Several members began flipping urgently through the packets, their faces growing graver with each page. "You can't prove," Robert started, but Elena held up her phone, playing an audio file that made him freeze. "Can't I?" The recording was clear. Robert discussing the school shooting, the offshore payments, his own voice incriminating him in ways no corporate lawyer could explain away. James wasn't the only one keeping records. Joe watched Elena command the room, seeing both the scared woman he'd sheltered and the corporate leader she'd become. When she faltered slightly, he stepped closer, his presence steady as a harbor. "In a storm." "This is absurd," Robert tried again, but board members were already whispering among themselves. "Elena is mentally unwell, as her recent episodes demonstrate." "You mean her proven allegations of domestic abuse?" Maria provided more documents, "or her documented attempts to investigate environmental hazards that the company buried." "Perhaps you're referring to her diagnosis and treatment of workers' children who lived downwind of your refineries." Elena's voice remained calm, though Joe saw her hands tremble slightly. "I am a doctor, Robert. I swore an oath to do no harm." "Did you ever swear anything, besides allegiance to your own power?" "This is still my company," Robert snarled, his corporate veneer cracking completely. "No." Elena stood straighter, channeling every inch of her father's dignity. "It was never your company. It was a trust, a responsibility, a legacy you tried to steal through violence and fear." She turned to the board members, many of whom had known her as a child. "My father believed that corporate power came with moral obligations. That profit without principle was just sophisticated theft. I'm not here to destroy what he built. I'm here to restore it." James stepped forward again, his good arm offering another file. "The restructuring plan Elena's proposing, it's what Father originally designed. Clean energy investment, worker protection, community health monitoring. We have proof that these practices actually increase long-term profitability." The board chairman, who'd been silent until now, studied Elena thoughtfully. "Edward always said you had his business sense and your mother's heart. I didn't understand then, but watching you fight for this company's soul." He lifted his hand. "I move to recognize Elena Blackwood's controlling shares and her immediate assumption of the CEO position." "Seconded," called another member, then another. Robert stood so abruptly, his chair crashed backward. "You can't." "The vote carries," the chairman announced, his voice heavy with corporate authority. "Ms. Blackwood, the floor is yours." But Robert wasn't finished. His hand darted inside his jacket, and Joe's military training screamed a warning. He lunged forward just as Robert produced a small pistol, pulling Elena down as the shot cracked through the boardroom's expensive silence. Chaos erupted. Security flooded in, board members dove for cover, and Robert's corporate mask shattered, completely as he ranted about betrayal and family loyalty. But Elena's voice cut through the madness, steady as a surgeon's hand. "Is this what power looks like to you, Robert? Violence when manipulation fails? Is this what you wanted to teach our son?" The mention of Timothy seemed to reach something in Robert that decades of corporate warfare hadn't touched. The gun wavered, then dropped from his hand as security surrounded him. "He's just a child," Robert whispered, and for the first time, Elena saw confusion replace rage in his eyes. "I only wanted to make him strong," Elena finished softly. "But strength isn't what you thought it was. It's not about breaking people, Robert, it's about healing them." As the police led Robert away, Elena turned to find Joe already reaching for her. The boardroom's expensive trappings faded around them as she let herself be held, let his solid presence anchor her in the aftermath. "Our victory." The chairman cleared his throat. "Well, Dr. Blackwood, I believe we have a company to rebuild." Elena straightened, touching her father's pendant one last time. "Yes," she said, looking at Joe, thinking of Timothy waiting safely at the shop with their makeshift family of protectors. "We do." The handcuffs clicked shut around Robert's wrists with a finality that echoed through the boardroom. His Italian suit, always so perfectly pressed, was wrinkled from his struggle with security. The corporate titan who'd terrorized Elena for years now looked smaller somehow, diminished by the exposure of his true nature. "You have the right to remain silent," the detective began, but Robert's shocked eyes were fixed on Elena, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're just like him," he whispered, and for once there was no manipulation in his voice. "Edward, you have his same certainty." The last word carried a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps the beginning of understanding. Elena stood steady, Joe's supportive presence at her shoulder. "No, Robert. I'm not just like my father. I'm also my mother's daughter, the woman who taught me that healing is harder than hurting, but infinitely more worthy." The boardroom had become a crime scene. Evidence markers dotted the expensive carpet where Robert's gun had fallen. James was giving his statement to investigators, his injured arm a testament to his changed loyalties. Maria coordinated with prosecutors, ensuring every corporate crime would face proper scrutiny. Sarah Chen arrived with her photographer, capturing the moment for tomorrow's headlines. But her focus wasn't on Robert's arrest. It was on Elena, standing tall amid the chaos, her father's pendant catching the morning light that streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Dr. Blackwood," Sarah's voice carried the weight of history being written, "what's your first priority as CEO?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "Healing. This company's relationship with its workers, its community, and its own conscience." She turned to the board members, who watched with a mixture of respect and wariness. "My father believed corporate power could be a force for good. It's time to prove him right." The elevator chimed, and Timothy burst into the room, having convinced his protective detail that the danger was past. He ran not to Elena first, but to Joe, wrapping small arms around the man who'd shown him what real fatherhood looked like. "You did it," Timothy said, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. "You protected us, just like you promised." Robert, being led away, stiffened at his son's words, at the evidence of Timothy's trust in another man, his preference for the mechanic's gentle strength over his biological father's harsh power. "Timothy," Robert called, a desperate edge in his voice. "Son," but Timothy didn't flinch or hide. Instead, he stood straighter, pressed against Joe's side. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he said clearly. Joe taught me that being brave isn't about being scary. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. Elena moved to stand with them, her corporate armor softened by maternal pride. Together, they formed a picture that would appear in tomorrow's papers. The new CEO of Blackwood Oil, the auto mechanic who'd given her shelter, and the boy whose courage had helped expose years of corporate corruption. The trust, Robert said. Suddenly, as officers prepared to escort him out. Elena, the trust Edward set up, he knew, didn't he? Even then he knew what I was becoming. He knew what the company could become, Elena corrected gently. Through me, through Timothy eventually, through everyone who believes profit and conscience can coexist. The boardroom slowly cleared, corporate titans filing past with congratulations that ranged from sincere to survival-oriented. James lingered, his good arm holding a stack of files. The environmental impact studies you wanted, he said quietly. From all our refineries, and, Elena, I'm sorry, for everything. Prove it, she replied, but her tone held no rancor. Help me fix what we broke, starting with those families near the refineries. Timothy tugged at her sleeve. Does this mean we have to leave the shop, live in Father's big house? No, sweetheart. Elena knelt to his level, years of corporate maneuvering falling away before maternal instinct. Our home is where we choose it to be, with the people we choose. She looked up at Joe, who'd remained steadfast through every twist of their journey. His shop clothes had been replaced by a suit for the board meeting, but his eyes held the same gentle strength that had welcomed them on that rainy night. Besides, Joe added, winking at Timothy, someone has to keep teaching you about engines. Can't do that in some fancy mansion. The boy's face lit up. Can we still have the science club meetings at the shop? And can Rex still sleep in my room? And yes, Elena laughed, the sound echoing off marble walls that had rarely heard genuine. Joy, yes to all of it. We'll find a way to balance everything. Sarah Chen was still taking notes, capturing this moment of transition. A CEO who makes house calls, she mused, running a corporate empire from an auto repair shop. That's quite a headline. No, Elena corrected, standing with her family. The headline is about a company remembering its heart, about power used to protect instead of control. She touched her father's pendant. About a legacy coming full circle. Outside the boardroom windows, Houston sprawled beneath them, its refineries and offices glinting in the morning sun. But Elena's eyes were drawn downtown, to where a humble auto repair shop had become the unlikely birthplace of corporate reformation. Ready to go home? Joe asked softly. Elena looked at Timothy, already chattering about showing his science club the real boardroom someday. At James, clutching his files like a chance at redemption. At the board members who waited to see how their new leader would reshape their world. Yes, she said simply, let's go home. The new sign gleamed in the morning sun. Miller and Son Auto Repair, a family business. Timothy had insisted on helping Joe hang it, carefully measuring each bracket's placement with the same precision he now brought to his role as youngest. Member of Blackwood Oil's Environmental Advisory Board. 1 year had transformed more than just the sign. The shop had expanded, taking over the adjacent building. The waiting room now doubled as a community health clinic, 2 days a week, where Elena saw patients between corporate meetings. Her father's pendant still caught the light, but now it shared space with the simple gold band on her left hand, a perfect match to Joe's work-worn one. Ready for the party? Joe asked, coming up behind Elena as she reviewed patient files at her desk. The shop hummed with preparation noise. Mama Rosa directing her crew in setting up the celebration feast, Mr. Chen's family hanging streamers, Mrs. Henderson arranging flowers from her garden. Almost. Elena smiled, touching the adoption papers, sitting ready for Timothy's signature. Hard to believe it's been a year. The headlines from that day were framed on the wall. Blackwood Oil heir arrested. corporate dynasty undergoes historic transformation. Love, justice, and motor oil, a modern fairy tale. Sarah Chen had won a journalism award for her coverage, though she still preferred sharing lunch with them at Mama Rosa's to attending fancy press events. James had kept his word, working tirelessly to help right the company's wrongs. The cancer clusters near the refineries were being properly investigated. Worker safety standards had been overhauled, and a new charitable foundation, named for Elena's mother, provided medical care to affected communities. Robert's trial had ended 3 months ago. The evidence was too overwhelming for even his expensive lawyers to explain away. He'd traded his corporate kingdom for a prison cell, though Elena made sure Timothy could visit whenever he wanted. Healing, she believed, took many forms. "Mom! Dad!" Timothy's voice carried from the garage. "Rex found something in the old files." The words Mom and Dad still created a warm glow in Elena's chest. They'd made it official 6 months ago, a quiet ceremony right here in the shop. She'd worn coveralls over her wedding dress while helping Joe fix Mrs. Henderson's Buick between exchanging vows. They found Timothy in Joe's office, Rex wagging his tail beside him. The boy held up a familiar piece of paper, the first invoice Elena had filled out from that rainy night a year ago. She'd written emergency repair under service needed, having no idea how accurate those words would prove. "Can we put it in the scrapbook?" Timothy asked. "Next to the newspaper stories and my science fair ribbon?" "Of course, buddy." Joe ruffled his son's hair, careful not to disturb the tie Timothy had insisted on wearing for the adoption ceremony. "It's part of our story." The shop slowly filled with their extended family. Maria arrived with her new paralegal team, dedicated to corporate accountability cases. James came bearing updates on the latest environmental initiatives, his arm long, healed, but his commitment to redemption unwavering. Mr. Chen's grandson, now apprenticing at the shop while studying engineering, demonstrated his latest diagnostic computer program. Mrs. Henderson's daughter had expanded her soap-making business into a full wellness line, sold in a corner of the waiting room between the engine parts catalogue and Elena's medical reference books. "Quite a change from corporate boardrooms," Sarah Chen observed, notebook ever ready. "The most powerful CEO in Houston, holding office hours in an auto repair shop." Elena watched Joe teach Timothy how to check transmission fluid, their heads bent together over the engine in perfect synchronization. "The best kind of power," she said softly, "is the kind that builds things. Families, communities, trust." "Speaking of building," Timothy called out, "can we show them the surprise now?" Joe nodded, and Timothy proudly unveiled his latest project. Detailed plans for expanding the clinic space, with a special wing for pediatric cases. He'd drawn it himself, combining his father's business precision with Joe's practical engineering sense. "For the other kids," Timothy explained, "the ones who need a safe place, like we did." Elena felt Joe's arm slip around her waist as they watched their son present his ideas to the gathered crowd. The boy, who'd once hidden behind his mother now, stood tall, explaining cost projections and community impact with confident enthusiasm. "You know," Joe murmured in her ear, "your father would be proud of all of this." Elena touched her pendant, then reached for the adoption papers. It was time. They gathered their family, blood and chosen, corporate and working class, all the pieces that had somehow fit together perfectly. "Ready to make it official, sweetheart?" she asked Timothy. His smile, bright and unafraid, was answer enough. As they signed the papers, Elena realized that every road in her life, even the painful ones, had led her here. To this shop that had become a sanctuary, to this man who had become her harbor, to this boy who had become their son. Outside, Houston's summer evening settled over the city. Through the shop windows, she could see Blackwood Oil's downtown towers, gleaming in the distance. But here, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and healing herbs, the sound of familiar laughter and comfortable conversation, Elena knew she'd found what her father had always wanted for her, not just success, but significance, not just power, but purpose, not just security, but love. They'd built something extraordinary from ordinary parts, like the engines Joe loved, to repair. And like those engines, it worked perfectly because every piece had found its proper place, turning life's raw energy into forward motion, carrying them together into whatever tomorrow might bring.